On June 11, 1944, at Majuro Atoll in the Marshall Islands, on the signal bridge of Task Force 58, static hissed across the radio waves as coded mission orders became battlefield instructions. Operation Forager was to start. Advance to the Marianas. Perform air superiority missions against Japanese strongholds on Saipan, Tinian, and Guam. Hold fleet preparedness for an expected enemy carrier reaction. Vice Admiral Mark Andrew Mitcher put down his binoculars and faced his operations officer. The assembled force included 15 fleet carriers, 7 battleships, 21 cruisers, and 69 destroyers, making it the biggest gathering of naval air power ever seen. What none of them could fully predict was that this single action would set off the most disastrous carrier fight in naval history, effectively wiping out Japanese naval aviation for good. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from, and if stories of heroes appearing in the darkest hour thrill you. Then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. The Pacific War had shown American strategists that aircraft carriers weren't just floating airfields. They were the key weapons of modern sea warfare. If you controlled the skies, you controlled the seas. If you controlled the seas, you could send power across the huge Pacific distances that once shielded Japan. The Essex-Class carriers were America's industrial reply to the strategic problem of the Pacific War. Task Force 58 moved through the Pacific waves at 25 knots. The huge Essex-Class carriers pushed aside 27 to 100 tons of seawater at their normal weight. Each vessel was 872 feet long, with a width of 93 feet. Vice Admiral Mitcher stood on the flag bridge of the USS Lexington, looking at the formations spread out over 40 miles of ocean. His command contained 7 Essex-Class carriers: the USS Essex, USS Yorktown, USS Hornet, USS Bunker Hill, USS Wasp, USS Lexington, and the USS Enterprise, plus 8 Independence-class light carriers, which included the USS Belleau Wood, USS Baton, USS Monterey, USS Cabot, USS San Jacinto, USS Princeton, USS Langley, and USS Cowpens. Each Essex-class carrier was home to 3,448 men and an air group of 90 planes. The ships held 4 squadrons: 36 F-6F Hellcat fighters, 36 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 18 TBF Avenger torpedo bombers. The numbers behind carrier warfare were beautiful in their straightforwardness. There were 900 planes working from mobile bases that could place themselves anywhere in the Pacific. Each carrier had 4 elevators that could move planes between the hangar and flight deck in 45 seconds. The flight deck catapults could send a plane into the air every 30 seconds during intense operations. Captain Arleigh Burke, Mitcher's chief of staff, had figured out the combat implications with his usual accuracy. A Harvard Law School graduate who became a naval planner, Burke knew that carrier combat was really about time and distance calculations, launch cycles, recovery times, fuel usage rates, and ammunition use. The line between winning and losing often depended on minutes in launching and nautical miles in placement. On board the Japanese carrier Taiho, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa looked over his mission plans for Operation Eigo. As the newest and biggest carrier in the Japanese Navy, Taiho displaced 29,300 tons and held 75 planes. Her armored flight deck, a feature not found on other Japanese carriers, was made to endure 500-pound bomb impacts. A total of 9 carriers with 430 planes made up Japan's last major carrier attack force. The main mobile fleet included the seasoned Shokaku and Zuikaku, survivors of Pearl Harbor, along with the fleet carriers Junyo and Hyo, and the light carriers Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho. But these numbers hid a deadly flaw that affected all Japanese carrier actions by mid-1944. The quality of their pilots had declined terribly. While Pearl Harbor veterans had around 700 hours of flight time, the pilots on Ozawa's carriers had fewer than 275 hours. Some had as little as 100 hours of total flying experience. The math of attrition had wrecked Japanese naval aviation as completely as any weapon. The Imperial Navy had lost over 400 skilled pilots at Midway, another 250 at the Eastern Solomons and Santa Cruz, and hundreds more during the tough Solomons campaign. The American carriers organized into 4 task groups as they neared the Marianas on June 11th. Task Group 58.1 was under Rear Admiral Joseph Jocko Clark with the carriers Hornet, Yorktown, Belleau-Wood, and Baton. Task Group 58.2 was led by Rear Admiral Alfred Montgomery with the Bunker Hill, Wasp, Monterey, and Cabot. Task Group 58.3 was headed by Rear Admiral John Reeves with the flagship Enterprise, Lexington, San Jacinto, and Princeton. Task Group 58.4 was under Rear Admiral William K. Harrell with the Essex, Langley, and Cowpens. At 1:00 p.m. on June 11th, the first Essex-Class fighter sweep took off toward Japanese airfields in the Marianas. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading VF-15 from the USS Essex, guided 32 Hellcats toward Saipan's Oslido airfield. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat was a perfect example of what the Essex-Class carriers stood for: dominance through industrial mass production. Driven by a 2,000-horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, the Hellcat could fly at 380 mph and ascend to 20,000 feet in 7 minutes. Radar operator First Class James Chen on the USS Essex followed the fighter sweep on his SK Air Search radar. The system could spot planes up to 100 miles away and at heights up to 30,000 feet. He would stop every few degrees, check the return signal, and figure out the range and direction. The Marianas Air Defense had about 500 Japanese planes, but only half were ready for combat. At 1:35 p.m., Brewer's Hellcats met the first Japanese defenders. 30 Mitsubishi A6M-Zeros rose to meet them, but the fight was cruelly one-sided. The Zero, a groundbreaking plane in 1940, was now terribly outdated. Its top speed was 331 mph, and it took 9.5 minutes to climb to 20,000 feet. It had no protective armor for the pilot and no self-sealing fuel tanks. Most importantly, the Japanese pilots had less than 200 hours of flying time, with many having under 100. The first day of fighting over the Marianas resulted in 147 Japanese planes destroyed for the loss of 11 American planes. Commander David McCampbell, leading Air Group 15 from the Essex, would later say it was like clubbing baby seals. The Japanese pilots used predictable flight paths, failed to keep their formations together, and showed poor shooting skills. Their combat communications were jumbled and conflicting. Japanese naval intelligence, listening to American radio messages from Tawi-Tawi, started to see the size of the danger. Urgent messages were sent to Admiral Ozawa, directing the mobile fleet to sail right away for the crucial battle. Operation Ego was set in motion. The strategy called for land-based planes from the Marianas to strike and weaken the American carriers, which would let Ozawa's carrier planes deliver the final blow. On June 13th, codebreakers at Fleet Radio Unit Pacific caught and decoded Japanese messages which showed Ozawa's plans. The mobile fleet would leave Tawi-Tawi, refuel in the Philippine Sea, and then strike the American invasion force at Saipan. Admiral Raymond Spruance, in charge of the Fifth Fleet, made the key choice that would determine the battle's course. Instead of chasing the Japanese fleet, Task Force 58 would stay close to the invasion beaches, making Ozawa come to them. Executive Officer John A. Williamson on the USS Yorktown figured out the combat geometry. Japanese carrier planes had a longer reach than their American equivalents. Zeros could fly 1,040 miles on their internal fuel. Kates and Vals had similar stamina. American Hellcats had a combat range of 340 miles, Helldivers 276 miles, and Avengers 275 miles. This meant Ozawa could launch attacks from outside the American strike range, a vital combat advantage. But Williamson knew something the Japanese had seemingly forgotten. Modern carrier combat was not about the performance of one plane, but about the combined power of systems. Radar-guided fighter control, proximity-fused anti-aircraft shells, damage control methods, and communication discipline. The Essex-Class carriers had huge advantages in all areas except for plane range. At 9:30 p.m. on June 18th, the submarine USS Kavala spotted the Japanese mobile fleet 360 miles west-southwest of Saipan. Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kostler followed the enemy group for 6 hours, sending contact updates that reached Spruance by 3 a.m. on June 19th. The Japanese were coming from the west, seemingly not knowing their location was discovered. At dawn on June 19, 1944, the weather was perfect for carrier actions. The sky was clear, you could see for 40 miles, and there was a moderate easterly wind at 14 knots. The sea had long Pacific swells. It was perfect flying weather for what would be the biggest carrier battle ever. At 7:30 a.m., radar men on the USS Yorktown saw the first wave of Japanese planes 140 miles away, 69 aircraft coming from the west at 18,000 feet. Fighter Direction Officer Lieutenant Joseph R. Eggert started guiding combat air patrol fighters to meet them. The new Grumman F-6 F-3 Hellcats, armed with 650 caliber machine guns each carrying 400 rounds, climbed toward the approaching raid. Lieutenant Alex Vraciu, flying from the USS Lexington, was one of the first to fight. An ace with 12 earlier victories, Vraciu would later describe the encounter. "I couldn't believe it. They were flying in perfect formation like it was an air show. No weaving, no cover, just straight and level." In 8 minutes of fighting, Vraciu shot down 6 Japanese planes, becoming an ace in a single day. The Japanese strike leader, Lieutenant Commander Akira Tarui from the carrier Taiho, had never experienced a radar-guided fighter interception. His pilots, with an average of 150 flight hours, were not ready for the organized Hellcat attacks. American fighters struck from above and behind, using their superior speed and guns with terrible results. Out of 69 planes in the first wave, 42 were shot down before they got to the American fleet. At 9:10 a.m., the submarine USS Albacore fired 6 torpedoes at the carrier Taiho from 5,000 yards away. One torpedo hit the carrier's fuel system, causing vapor leaks that would be deadly. Damage Control Officer Commander Utaka Kobayashi ordered the ventilation systems reversed to clear the fumes, which accidentally spread gasoline vapors all over the ship. The second Japanese strike wave, with 128 planes, came at 10:00 a.m. Radar-guided Hellcats met them 60 miles from the fleet. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading VF-15 from the Essex, described the fight. "It was like a training exercise. They flew right into our guns without trying to dodge." 97 Japanese planes were destroyed from the second wave. American anti-aircraft fire, guided by Mark 37 gun directors with radar ranging, made a wall of steel around the carriers. The new proximity-fused shells exploded near the planes without needing a direct hit. Japanese pilots who made it back said that the American ship seemed to be protected by an unbreakable shield of explosions. At 12:20 p.m., the submarine USS Kavala hit the veteran carrier Shokaku with 4 torpedoes. Captain Hiroshi Matsubara ordered counterflooding, but the damage was devastating. Shokaku had survived Coral Sea and the Eastern Solomons, but 9 months of constant use without proper upkeep had weakened her ability to handle damage. Aviation fuel leaked from broken tanks, and electrical systems failed. 3 hours later, Shokaku sank with 1,263 men. The third Japanese wave of 47 planes, launched at 10:00 a.m., reached the American fleet at 1:00 p.m. Only 7 made it back to their carriers. Fighter pilot Ensign Kaneo Muto, one of the few survivors, would later testify, "The American fighters were everywhere, above us, next to us, behind us. Their methods were perfect. We never had a chance." Admiral Ozawa, not knowing his growing losses, ordered a 4th attack of 82 planes at 11:30 a.m. Confused by bad communications and navigation mistakes, this wave split into 2 groups. One group of 33 planes flew north and found nothing. The other 49 planes ran into Task Group 58.2. American Hellcats destroyed 30 planes in 12 minutes. At 2:52 p.m., a huge explosion wrecked the carrier Taiho. The built-up fuel vapors had reached a critical point. The blast broke the carrier's back, sending her to the bottom with 1,650 men, including Admiral Ozawa's air staff. Ozawa himself survived, moving his flag to the cruiser Haguro, but effective command of the mobile fleet was gone. By sunset on June 19th, the Japanese had sent out 373 carrier planes. Only 130 came back. American losses were 29 planes in air-to-air combat, with most pilots saved. The kill ratio was over 10-1, the most one-sided air combat result of the whole war. American pilots with 300 to 500 hours of flight time had systematically defeated their opponents. At 3:40 p.m. on June 20th, search planes from the USS Enterprise found the retreating Japanese fleet 275 miles west-northwest of Task Force 58. The distance was very far, beyond the usual combat range of American planes. The recovery would happen after dark, something carrier aviation rules strongly advised against. But Mitcher knew this might be the only chance to finish the destruction of Japanese carrier aviation. At 4:21 p.m., Mitcher gave the order, "Launch everything you've got." 40 planes took off in 10 minutes from 11 carriers, 85 Hellcats, 77 dive bombers, and 54 torpedo bombers. Fuel calculations were vital. Each pilot knew they had just enough fuel for the attack and the return, with no room for error. Lieutenant Commander James Jig Dog Ramage, leading Bombing Squadron 10 from the Enterprise, told his pilots, "Gentlemen, this is a one-way ticket unless you watch your fuel. Lean mixture, optimal cruise settings, no unnecessary flying. We get one pass at the target, then it's a straight line home." The American attack found the Japanese fleet at dusk. In the dim light, the carrier Hiyo took multiple torpedo hits from Avengers of the Belleau Wood. The old carrier, changed from a passenger ship, had poor compartmentalization. She sank in 2 hours with 250 men. The carriers Zuikaku and Chiyoda were damaged, along with the battleship Haruna. The flight back became a story of navigation and stamina. As night fell, planes started to run out of fuel. Pilots ditched next to destroyers when their engines died. Others made it near the task force but couldn't find their carriers in the dark. At 8:45 p.m., Mitcher made a decision that would become famous. "Turn on the lights." Every ship in Task Force 58 lit up. Searchlights pointed straight up, running lights blazed, and flight deck lights showed the landing areas. Star shells burst overhead. For 2 hours, the fleet recovered planes, many landing on any open deck. 80 planes were lost, but most pilots were saved. The mission had cost American carrier aviation a lot, but Japanese carrier power was done. By dawn on June 21st, the size of the Japanese disaster was becoming clear. In 2 days of fighting, the Imperial Japanese Navy had lost 3 fleet carriers: Taiho, Shokaku, and Hiyo. More importantly, they had lost between 476 and 600 planes, including land-based aircraft and about 445 aircrew. The survivors flying back to Ozawa's remaining carriers had neither the ability nor the experience to carry out offensive missions. American losses were 123 planes, with 76 aircrew killed. More importantly, Task Force 58 still had over 750 working planes with trained pilots. The industrial numbers were unstoppable. American training programs were turning out 2,000 new naval pilots a month. Each pilot got 500 hours of flight training, including 50 hours in combat plane types. Advanced training included radar interception, night missions, and instrument flying. Japanese pilot training had fallen to 100 to 150 hours total, with many pilots getting as little as 50 hours in combat types. Fuel shortages cut training flights. Skilled instructors had been sent back to combat units. The rushed programs made pilots who could barely take off and land, let alone fight. Commander David McCampbell, who would become the Navy's top ace with 34 victories, analyzed the combat situation. By June 1944, we weren't fighting the Japanese Navy that attacked Pearl Harbor. Those pilots were dead. We were fighting kids who could barely fly. The Essex carriers and their air groups were weapons made for industrial war, and Japan couldn't keep up. A review of the numbers showed the devastating effectiveness of American carrier operations. Each Essex-Class carrier could launch a full attack of 40 planes in 12 minutes. Recovery took 18 minutes. Rearming and refueling took 45 minutes. In theory, each carrier could send out 3 full attacks in 4 hours. With 15 carriers working together, Task Force 58 could put 600 planes over a target at the same time. The Battle of the Philippine Sea wrecked Japanese naval aviation beyond repair. Admiral Toyoda's later evaluation was direct. "The first mobile fleet has been made useless as an offensive force. Our carrier pilot strength is gone. We must use different methods." Those different methods would appear 4 months later as kamikaze attacks, the desperate move of a Navy that could no longer train regular pilots. Vice Admiral Ozawa, saved from the water after Taiho sank, sent his final report on June 24th. The enemy's radar-controlled interception was perfect. Their pilots showed overwhelming skill in every part of air combat. Our attacks were beaten before they could get in effective range. The mobile fleet air groups no longer exist as a fighting force. The Essex-Class carriers had proven the American way of naval warfare through industrial mass production. Each ship included lessons from past fights. Better ventilation systems stopped explosive vapors from building up. Improved damage control training meant that even badly damaged ships like the USS Franklin and USS Bunker Hill would survive attacks that would have sunk older ships. Production numbers showed the hopelessness of Japanese resistance. By June 1944, American shipyards had commissioned 7 Essex-class carriers, with 17 more being built. The Newport News Shipbuilding Company alone was launching 1 carrier every 6 months. Total construction time had been cut to 14 months through standard parts and assembly line methods. The technology gap was just as critical. American radar systems had 100-mile detection ranges with height-finding ability. The Mark 37 gun director with Mark 12 radar could track planes at 40,000 yards. VT proximity fuses made anti-aircraft fire 300% more deadly. Combat information centers managed defensive actions with unmatched effectiveness. Japanese technology was stuck at 1941 levels. The Zero fighter, revolutionary at the start of the war, had only small improvements. Radar systems were basic and unreliable. Communication gear was outdated. Most importantly, Japan didn't have the industrial ability to put combat lessons into new designs. Training programs showed the strategic difference between the two sides. The U.S. Navy Training Command ran 14 air stations with 10,000 training planes. Monthly pilot production was 3 times higher than losses. Each pilot went through primary, basic, advanced, and operational training stages. Combat veterans came home as instructors, making sure combat lessons were quickly added to the training. Japanese training had shrunk to short programs that made barely qualified pilots. The Yokorin program, which had made elite naval pilots before 1942, was cut to teaching basic flying skills. Advanced combat training was dropped because of fuel shortages. Formation flying, shooting practice, and navigation training were minimal or non-existent. The human cost was immense. Of the 450 Japanese aircrew lost in the Philippine Sea, most were irreplaceable veterans with over a year of combat experience. Their loss meant that the collective knowledge of carrier operations died with them. The survivors didn't have the experience to train new pilots or create new tactics. American personnel policies made sure experience was kept. Combat tours were limited to save veteran pilots. Rotation policies meant that every squadron had a mix of veterans and new pilots. Skilled pilots were sent to training commands after finishing their combat tours. This organized way of managing human resources proved as important as better technology. By October 1944, when the Imperial Japanese Navy made its last attempt at Leyte Gulf, the carrier force that had shocked the world at Pearl Harbor was gone. 4 carriers sailed with Admiral Ozawa as a sacrificial decoy force, carrying only 108 planes with half-trained pilots. The fight off Cape Engano was less a battle and more of an execution. American carrier planes sank all 4 Japanese carriers while losing only 10 planes. The Essex-class carriers would keep fighting throughout the Pacific War, but their biggest victory was already won. In 2 days over the Philippine Sea, they had done what 3 years of tough attrition had failed to do: the total destruction of Japanese naval aviation as an effective fighting force. Admiral Chester Nimitz's summary was typically brief. The Essex-class carriers and their air groups represented American industrial democracy at war. Mass production, technological innovation, and systematic training created a weapon system that the Japanese could neither match nor counter. The Battle of the Philippine Sea was not just a tactical victory, but a validation of the American approach to modern warfare. The legacy went beyond World War II. 24 Essex-class carriers were finished, serving through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 1970s. The USS Lexington, a survivor of the Philippine Sea Battle, stayed in commission until 1991, a testament to the strong design that had changed naval warfare. In the deep Pacific, 3 Japanese carriers lie on the seabed, their planes still in their hangars, their pilots at their posts. They are monuments to the last time when individual skill and bravery might have overcome industrial mass production. But the numbers, as Executive Officer Williamson had known, were unstoppable. The Essex-class carriers had not just won a battle. They had shown that future naval warfare belonged to nations that could use industrial democracy, technological innovation, and organized training on a huge scale. The Philippine Sea marked the end of a time when naval aviation was an art done by elite warriors. The future belonged to nations that could turn warfare into an industrial process where victory was decided not by individual heroism, but by production numbers, training hours, and technological details. The Essex-Class carriers, products of American shipyards and crewed by citizen sailors, had forever changed the nature of naval warfare.